A 19-year-old girl was found dead in her apartment. The investigators began their investigation and quickly uncovered some disturbing facts, but they haven't solved the case in years. When the truth came out, everyone was shocked and outraged by this turn of events. After all, no one expected such an outcome. Friends, after watching, I recommend subscribing to my channel, where I often publish for you interesting criminal news from around the world. Nona Dirkmayer was born on December 26, 1985 in Russellville, Arkansas. She grew up in a very large family. She had 4 brothers and 1 sister. When Nona was 10 years old, her father died. This event was a tragedy for the whole family, but then they faced an even more terrible shock. After a while, the girl admitted to her mother that her father had repeatedly abused her. She was afraid to talk about it while he was alive. Her confession was a real shock to her mother. The woman had no idea what her husband was doing. Despite such a tragic experience, Nona found the strength to move on, and later she decided to help other girls who were victims of similar crime. To this end, she joined a volunteer organization to support children who needed her. In high school, Nona started dating a guy named Kevin. She also participated in beauty pageants, achieving great success in this direction. Nona won several local contests, which allowed her to qualify for the state's beauty queen. She was also active in the local church and sang in the choir after school. When Nona was 19, she and her boyfriend enrolled at the University of Arkansas in her hometown. The girl also decided to rent her apartment because she wanted to start her own life. After her first year, her boyfriend decided to switch majors and transfer to another university, which was an hour-and-a-half drive from their town. By then, the couple had been dating for about 5 years. They lived in different cities for the first time. On December 14, 2005, Kevin returned home for Christmas. He went to Non's house, which was about 16 km away. The next day, they both had planned. Nona had to pass her last 2 exams and also meet a girl from a volunteer organization. Kevin was gonna take his mom, who worked as a librarian, to a school event on the morning of December 15 at around 9:00 p.m. Nona texted the guy saying good day. Kevin waited for her to call him after the exam to let him know how it went, but the girl hasn't checked in. She wasn't answering her text either, and the guy got worried. At about 6:00 p.m, he took his mother to a school event, but the young man couldn't help but think why Nona hadn't picked up the phone all day. Eventually, Kevin decided to call his friend, who was working as a pizza delivery boy in the area where Nona's apartment complex was located. Kevin asked him to stop by and check on her. His friend drove up quickly and saw that Nona's car was parked in the parking lot and the lights were on in her apartment, but no one answered the doorbell. He told Kevin about it. Then the young man told his mother that he was worried about his girlfriend and wanted to drive to her apartment to see if everything was okay. The woman agreed, and together they headed to the apartment complex. Kevin's friend was waiting there for them, and all 3 began to knock on the door, but there was still no answer. The guy had a key, but he left it at home that day because he wasn't planning on stopping by Nona's. A few minutes later, Kevin and his friend tried to open the front door as they thought something bad might have happened to the girl, but they failed. Then the guy remembered that in the back of the apartment there are sliding glass doors. As he approached them, he noticed something strange. Nona took her safety seriously, so every time she stayed home alone, the girl put a special removable grill on the back of the glass door, mostly used against robbers. They are easy to install and remove from the inside of the house, but it is very difficult to do from the outside. But this time the bars weren't there, and the doors weren't locked. When they got to the apartment, they immediately noticed the blood on the blinds, and a shocking picture was waiting for them in the bedroom. Nona was lying face down in a pool of blood. She was missing all her clothes except her socks. Evan rushed to her and tried to lift her up, but he knew immediately that she was dead. Meanwhile, his mother called the police. Investigators arrived at the apartment and began to examine the crime scene. They immediately assumed that the girl had been hit several times on the head with a desk lamp lying on the floor. They also found a bloody smeared print on the lamp itself, suggesting it might have been left by the killer. They found her phone next to the victim's body, and they took the battery out. Investigators also found an empty contraceptive package on the bedside table. They looked through all the doors and windows and found no signs of forced entry. Medical experts examined the victim's body and confirmed that the desk lamp was used as a weapon. Nonna suffered several blows to the head, and the metal base of the lamp matched these injuries. In addition, the girl was stabbed many times. According to the pathologist, her death occurred between 10:30 in the morning and 1 o'clock in the afternoon. At the same time, experts did not find any traces of violence, which greatly puzzled the detective. Given that the victim was not wearing any clothes, the first thing they thought about was the sexual motive for the crime. In addition, experts assumed that the criminal could have used a contraceptive, a package from which was found in the apartment. Again, it would be virtually impossible to establish the existence of violence. As a result, the police had no evidence, but soon discovered one interesting point. The examination of the crime scene was done rather carelessly. Investigators didn't take blood samples from the blinds or the back doors. We haven't even dusted them or even looked for footprints in the apartment, which could also be used as evidence. In fact, they didn't even go upstairs. Such omissions on the part of the police were explained by a simple fact. Almost immediately after they arrived at the scene, investigators found their suspect, the victim's boyfriend. The first thing that made them think about Kevin's involvement in the murder was the fact that the young man had a large amount of Nonna's blood on him. When the guy came into the apartment and ran up to her, he tried to lift her up, and realizing that she was dead, he hugged her and held her close to him. The police thought it was strange and allowed Kevin to do it intentionally by hugging the victim and smearing his blood on the victim. The guy could destroy potential evidence and compromise the crime scene, which would make it harder for investigators to prove his guilt. For example, if blood was found on the victim's clothes or under Kevin's feet, it could easily be explained by the fact that he hugged the victim after finding her body. Another suspicious thing was that Kevin went to check on his girlfriend not alone, but with his mother. Moreover, he called to his friend's apartment. Investigators admitted that he had secured 2 witnesses who found the body with him and saw him spilling blood on it. The policeman talked to Kevin for a long time outside Nonna's apartment, and on their questions, the young man realized that they thought he was a suspect. Then he said something that made the investigators think he was the killer even more. Realizing that he was suspected, Kevin began to argue with investigators. Those words also struck the police as odd. On top of that, they found out that Nonna's apartment key was only held by 3 people, the girl herself, her mom and Kevin. Given that there was no sign of forced entry, they assumed the guy used his copy of the key to get into the apartment. Kevin was brought in for questioning. For several hours he told his version of the events of the day and insisted that he had nothing to do with the murder. In turn, the investigators had already directly accused him and asked him to confess. The interrogation revealed another fact that the police found strange. At about 4:00 p.m., after numerous attempts to reach the girl, Kevin sent her a message, considering Nonna was dead at the time. The investigators considered it suspicious. At the same time, the guy did not demand a lawyer and tried to answer all questions. Investigators talked to him for hours, constantly raising the pressure. In the end, they began not only directly accusing him of murder, but also manipulating the facts. The detectives have said several times that there is irrefutable evidence against him, and the only way to make things easier for yourself is to come clean. After the police left the interrogation room and left him alone, Kevin got up and started punching the back of the chair. For the researchers, this was another indication that the young man had a tendency to violence and could commit murder. However, in reality, the police had no evidence to link Kevin to the murder. Medical examiners have determined that Nonna was trying to fend off her attacker, which meant the killer's body would have had abrasions and scratches, but Kevin didn't have any. The detectives kept thinking he was guilty and trying to find evidence. They interviewed over 50 people, hoping to find any witnesses, but nothing came of it. However, after talking to Nonna's friends, the police learned something important. It turns out that just before she died, the girl started dating another guy in secret from Kevin. Investigators immediately checked this man out, but he had a solid alibi for the time of the murder. This fact added to Kevin's suspicions because he now had motive. The young man could have come to Nonna's house unannounced and seen an empty bottle of contraception. Realizing that the girl was cheating on him, the guy could have killed her in a fit of rage, then fled the scene and devised a plan to avoid responsibility. This version matched the nature of the injuries inflicted by the victim. She was killed with extreme brutality, which in most cases indicates a strong personal dislike for the victim. In the following days, Kevin agreed to undergo polygraph interrogation. As a result, the operator concluded that the young man gave many false answers. One of the investigators even said that this is the worst result on a polygraph for his 28-year career. But here was a nuance. The person who read the readings of the devices was not a certified specialist. He was a simple policeman who did not have the necessary training to work with this tool. But the detectives did not mind. After questioning, they pressured Kevin again to get a confession. They said that everyone he knew and his family already knew that he had killed Nonna. The police did tell everyone that Kevin's guilt was almost proven and that he would soon be arrested. They convinced the victim's parents that he had killed their daughter, although they refused to believe it. A farewell ceremony was to be held at the church the day before the funeral, and Kevin helped organize it from the morning. A little later, the detectives called him again for questioning, promising that he would be released before the ceremony. He spent 7 hours at the police station and missed the ceremony. No one here knew he was being questioned. So many thought that Kevin had not come because he felt guilty. Nonna's parents didn't even want him to come to the funeral, as investigators had already convinced them of his involvement in the murder. But Kevin did come and stay away from her relatives. By that time, Sue had finished going through the evidence the cops had taken from the victim's apartment. They examined the light bulb in the desk lamp and found a fingerprint that belonged to Kevin. He was left with Nonna's blood, which suggested that the fingerprint would only appear during or after the murder. It became the only evidence available to investigators, but they kept digging into Kevin for months, hoping to find more evidence. They never succeeded, so on 31 March 2006, they decided to try to get a conviction with the available data. The young man was arrested and charged with murder. At that time, many residents continued to believe that he was guilty, so Kevin's lawyers were the first to request a relocation. They feared the jury might be negative against their client and convict without sufficient evidence. This request was granted, and the trial began in another city. The defense called a witness who gave Kevin a solid alibi. A plumber came to his parents' house that morning, and he saw a young man there about 10:30 in the morning. The prosecution insisted that Kevin might have had time to go to Nonna and commit the murder because, according to medical experts, she died between 10:30 and 1:00. They also presented a very interesting fact. It turns out that Kevin's phone was off between 10:30 and 12 hours. That's the timeline from the time the victim was killed. Moreover, Kevin's phone records indicated that he didn't start calling his girlfriend until 4:30. Although during the interrogations he claimed that he had been trying to contact her all day. However, then the young man could not only mean the calls, but also the messages. But the lawyers presented 2 more witnesses whose testimony denied the possibility of committing this murder. One of them was Kevin's grandmother. She said she saw his grandson at the gas station that day and gave him some money to eat at the cafe. Another witness saw the guy between 1:30 and 1:00 in front of the restaurant. The house cameras caught him eating lunch, so the young man would have simply not had time to commit the murder and come back. Lawyers also disputed the fact that Kevin may have left a bloody fingerprint on the lamp at the time of the murder. In that case, the blood should have dried up by the time the body was discovered, and the experts who came to the apartment that night wrote in the report that the bloody print was a little wet. This confirmed that Kevin may have left it accidentally when he found Nonna's body with her mother and a friend. But that's not all. It turns out, based on the desk lamp that was used to hit the victim, they also found print. Except they didn't belong to Kevin, and background checks didn't work. The lawyers insisted that these prints belonged to the real killer. Lawyers also pointed out that the police officers performed their work extremely poorly from the first minutes. They didn't search the entire apartment, which could have missed a lot of potential evidence. The medical expert who examined the body of the victim spoke at the trial. Here, all participants in the trial were waiting for a very interesting statement. He established that the victim's body was on his back for some time, after which she was turned face down. It could indicate that the girl was abused after all. The expert confirmed that he did not find any direct evidence of this, but added that he could not rule out such a scenario. And finally, the lawyers presented the main bargaining chip. According to the prosecution's official statement, no fingerprints or DNA were found on an empty contraceptive package found near the victim's body. But the lawyers ordered a second test, and this time, the lab found male DNA. The analysis showed that it didn't belong to Kevin, and the background check didn't yield any results. The trial lasted over a year, but in July 2007 the jury reached its verdict. They found Kevin not guilty of killing Nona for lack of evidence. The relatives of the victim, who considered him a murderer from the first weeks, were shocked. They continued to believe that Kevin was responsible for her death, and now he managed to escape responsibility. Even though their client was acquitted, a team of lawyers promised to keep working the case and find the real killer. Given that the cops were fixated on Kevin, no one expected them to finally come to their jobs in a responsible way. The first thing they did was get the DNA from the pill wrapper to match all the men who knew Nona. All of these people volunteered their samples and none of them matched. This went on for 2 months until something unexpected happened in September 2007. Police arrested a man named Gary Dunn for robbery, and that's where it all started. First, this man was already on trial for assaulting another woman. Second, he lived in the same apartment complex as Nona. Third, in the early stages of the investigation, the police treated him as a suspect, but quickly turned to Kevin because they thought he was the killer. With all that in mind, the guy's lawyers requested a DNA test, and then the long-awaited breakthrough happened. The pill wrapper matched Gary's DNA. It turned out that after the murder of the girl, the investigators even conducted a polygraph interrogation. Gary, who was 26 years old at the time, passed it completely. Although in that case, the interrogation was also conducted by an uncertified specialist. Moreover, none of them even checked the man's alibi. Harry said that he was shopping with his mother at the time of the murder. After his DNA matched the sample from the victim's apartment, the investigators took the trouble to verify the information, and the alibi was false. Gary really went shopping with his mum, except not at the time of the murder, but 2 days before. This was confirmed by the cash checks on which the date of purchase was written. And Harry even showed them to the cops, but the cops didn't pay much attention to such important information. They saw the date on the checks didn't match the day of the murder. It's in their report. But for some unknown reason, they either didn't think it mattered or somehow didn't notice that the days didn't add up. Finally, experts compared his fingerprints to those found on Nona's desk lamp, and they matched. However, there was a serious problem here. The DNA fingerprints matched, but not 100s. The judicial system has established certain standards by which the necessary indicia for a guilty plea are established. In Gary's case, these numbers were not enough, although there was little chance that the DNA and fingerprints belonged to anyone else. The investigators were likely to be responsible. First of all, they didn't go through all the available evidence immediately after the murder as required by the rules. It's possible the DNA sample went a little sour before it was examined a year after the murder. Secondly, the police may have missed a lot of other evidence because they simply did not search the entire apartment. Once the detectives got all this information, they arrested Gary and accused him of killing Nona. Significantly, the man was on parole at the time of her death. In 2002, he attacked a woman who was running in the park, threw her to the ground, and began to beat her. He also told her that he was going to kill her. The woman managed to escape and ran to her car. Meanwhile, Gary fled the crime scene, but was quickly found. The man spent 19 months in prison before being released on parole. It's noteworthy that his DNA sample wasn't entered into the database. Gary's trial started in April 2010, and everyone was expecting a lot of interesting things. The witness against the man was his own wife, who said that he was an aggressive and dangerous man. Gary regularly raised a hand to her, and the woman feared for her life, so she was afraid to leave him. But the most interesting thing was that a few weeks before the victim died, she saw her husband peering out Nonna's window. On this basis, the prosecution admitted that the man had planned to attack her beforehand. Given his criminal history, Gary clearly had a history of violence. He could look at Nonna for a long time because she lived only a few meters away. And on December 15, he decided to act. Apparently, he knocked on her door and went inside under false pretenses. There he grabbed a table lamp and hit her several times. After that, he abused and killed. Because of Gary's use of birth control, medical experts simply could not say for certain whether the victim had been abused. But all the evidence pointed that out. Gary's lawyers denied his involvement. However, the man did not have a real alibi, so they focused on making Kevin look guilty. According to lawyers, the guy found out that the girl was cheating on him and killed her. Kevin even had to stand up in court and be treated like a criminal. Unfortunately, the prosecution could not use Gary's fingerprints as evidence, although the match was almost conclusive. As a result, the jury was able to reach a common decision, and the trial was declared invalid. The new trial wasn't long in coming, and his key difference was that she was the woman Gary almost killed in 2002. She told me how a man attacked her and how she managed to escape. Despite this, the second trial also ended in nothing, as the jury found no common solution. In this connection, Gary Dan was released as a free man, though his guilt was almost obvious. But after a few years, the man still earned a prison sentence. In 2018, when Harry was 39, he committed 2 different crimes in one day. At first, he tried to kidnap a woman from the church parking lot, but she fought back. A few hours later, Gary undressed in front of another woman in the mall parking lot. Gary was arrested shortly afterwards. Given his criminal history and the fact that he is almost certainly Nonna's killer, the court decided to sentence him to the maximum sentence. Gary got 15 years in prison for these 2 episodes, and he's serving his sentence to this day. Although he has the right to apply for early release, the authorities are unlikely to grant him such an opportunity. In addition, they have the right to accuse him of killing Nonna for the 3rd time. However, they are in no hurry to do so. The likelihood of a new trial ending the same way as the previous 2 is very high. So investigators are trying to gather more evidence and prepare a stronger case against Gary. As for Kevin, after all this, he took up law school and in 2011 sued 2 authority cops, Russell Will and Gary Dana. The man claimed that they were trying to pin a crime on him, ignoring many of the evidence and refusing to do their job properly. In preparation for the trial, Kevin discovered that Gary's polygraph results actually revealed a lie, but the investigators still did not consider him a suspect. Unfortunately, his suit was dismissed due to the statute of limitations. As a result, negligent police officers have not been held responsible for the fact that the real killer has been on the loose for years and may be back in a few years. Nor will they be held accountable for the fact that all of Nonna's friends and relatives have for years considered Kevin a murderer. It was only a few years ago that her parents stopped believing in it and established a relationship with Kevin. The man now works as a lawyer and seeks to help those who suffer from police negligence or unprofessionalism. Share your opinion on this story in the comments and be sure to like it under this clip if you like. I also recommend subscribing to our channel, where we often publish the most interesting criminal news from around the world. Thanks for watching.